Massive dysfunction is continuing worldwide at the highest levels of the legacy financial circus as a new report paints a grim picture for world banks. Meanwhile, the Fed can't stop pouring money into the dumpster fire that is Wall Street. More negative rates are hitting Europe, and critical failures of banking infrastructure hit Lebanon and Chile only weeks after a similar story out of Hong Kong. So, let's start our discussion today with this damning report from the management consultancy firm McKinsey, which said that half of the world's banks are too weak to survive a downturn, and that banks must act now or risk becoming a footnote of history and obsolete if abrupt and dramatic changes aren't made quickly. That is a damn stark warning for banks. And are we likely to see a downturn soon? Well, we have all those negative yielding bonds, record debt, trade wars, increasing wealth inequality, all of which are signs that we are in for some stormy financial weather in the coming times. And up to half of the banks are going under. That would be pretty bad if that happens. And you really need to keep in mind too that these commercial banks, they are so dirty and incestuous. They will fall like dominoes. Once one of the bigger ones go under, like Deutsche Bank or one of the other quite large commercial banks, it's going to be bad. Why anyone thinks their money is safe in the bank is beyond me. What, you think the FDIC is going to save you when half of the banks crumble? Riddle me this. How can an insurance fund that covers just 1% of all U.S. deposits cover half of deposits if half of the banks are at risk? Something doesn't add up there to me. Maybe 2 plus 2 does equal 5 after all. Furthermore, the report says that most banks globally are not generating returns on equity and are thus unable to keep pace with their expenditures. The report is urging banks to develop new technology, among other solutions. There is currently a technological wave sweeping across the world of finance, and that wave is going to eat many banks. Bitcoin is a big part of that. You have to keep that real. But also, the challenger banks that are going full mobile and are offering better services to an increasingly digital citizenry. In the last year, valuations of banks across the globe have decreased by as much as 20%, which is an astonishing figure. But in fact, if you zoom out a little bit, a lot of the commercial banks' stocks have taken eye-watering falls over the last couple of years. We're just talking about 20% in the last year. Zoom out 5 or 10 years, oh boy. The report also brings up competition from the likes of Facebook, and of course, as we know, they're working on their little Libra project. But the so-called rebels of today, the challenger banks and the likes of Libra, they will become the overlords of tomorrow. There is no point in having a financial revolution if we simply switch one master for a possibly worse master. And this is why Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies really in a broader sense are so different and so damn important. Bitcoin's not trying to become your new overlord. Bitcoin is breaking down the walls and removing the shackles of the legacy financial system. Cryptocurrencies are in so many ways already so much more advanced than the current banking technology. And of course, they come with the sweet bonus of being decentralized and permissionless and censorship resistant. So, bonus on that. We literally do not need the banks anymore. We don't. Bitcoin has changed everything. It was the Pandora's box moment in global finance. But now begins the long marathon of simply trying to unplug everyone from the matrix who has grown up thinking that this dysfunctional system is normal, and of course of supporting the builders who are actually making that revolution happen. Now with McKinsey sending up the warning shots about the extinction of half the world's banks, and the unbelievable level of systemic risk in the global banking system, we get this fun news out of Europe, which is a warning from the ECB that low rates, and remember, the EU is now in the negative rates zone, may drive banks to do riskier business. So basically making the likelihood of failure even greater for banks which are already on the brink. And another story which I think really reinforces this just total insanity which is happening is this one from the New York Fed. The NY Fed has announced that they have increased the amount offered in the overnight repo markets to at least $120 billion starting today. Remember, everything's fine, nothing's happening, but Wall Street needs $120 billion a day. What? Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve is buying $7.5 billion a day in Treasury bonds. We covered this story last week, but apparently the banks, they cannot get enough of this. Just to give you an idea of how popular this has been, remember, this is just everything's cool. This is not QE4, but yesterday it was 6 times oversubscribed with around $44 billion in bids for the $7.5 billion available. The demand for the Fed's permanent liquidity solution is increasing daily, which probably means that the liquidity crisis happening at the highest levels of the financial system is getting worse, not better. Oh man, it sickens me how much they will unquestioningly put up all this money for Wall Street. Main Street, sorry about your bad luck for being poor. What are they not telling us? What's going on? Something serious is happening on Wall Street. Remember back in 2008, no one said what was happening until it was way too late, but everybody kind of knew what was happening and let it happen anyway. Now moving on to Europe. Credit Suisse is the latest bank to charge clients for cash deposits. So now individual and business customers at Credit Suisse will be charged a rate of 0.75% on cash balances over 2 million Swiss francs, which is just a little more than 2 million US dollars. Credit Suisse, by the way, is Switzerland's second biggest lender. Now, you may not feel too bad for people who have millions of dollars in the bank, but this could grow. This could affect everyone. They also announced that a rate of 0.85% will be imposed on business customers with balances above 10 million francs. Banks are punishing customers for having cash accounts. This is on the rise, particularly in Europe, but around the world. It's only a matter of time before we see levels come down to really average investors. And as banks are squeezed more and more, the likelihood of farther rate cuts only increases. And as the rate cuts get cut farther, you will see regular people being hit by these. And this follows a story from last week about negative rates over in Germany and how other banks in the region were considering doing the same, seeing what the German bank was doing. Well, it seems like Credit Suisse looked over and said, yeah, we're going to do that too. Japan is also in the negative zone. Then we have Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the UK, the US. They're all super low rates, but none of those are in the negative zone yet. But most analysts do agree that all of these countries are likely to see more rate cuts. Now, for some, that will mean moving into the negative zone. So, rate cuts coming to a town near you guys. How long do you think the rich are going to be sitting on large cash deposits, which are guaranteed to lose money? Probably not super long, especially if this continues to get worse. What we may start seeing some investors do with a portion of their cash is doing what is called the carry trade. Yeah, some are going to get gold and all that stuff too, but the carry trade is this. This is a strategy where a trader uses a low yielding currency to fund a high yielding investment. This is where the crypto lending services come into play. You have Celsius and Nexo and BlockFi and Crypto.com and Compound Finance. All of these are offering super competitive rates for dollar-backed stablecoins. Imagine sitting on cash in a systemically risky bank which may be facing collapse and which is giving you a negative return on your cash and doing nothing about it. Then imagine taking even a portion of that cash and earning from 8 to 10 up to 12% annually to be providing liquidity to the crypto lending market. And look, guys, when we talk about crypto lending, I totally understand people who do not want to lend out their Bitcoin. Really, I get it. This is part of the Bitcoin movement. But if you are sitting on bucket loads of cash, and look, not everyone is 100% into Bitcoin. Lots of people have cash and property and stocks and all that stuff. But if you're sitting on bucket loads of cash, there's actually a very interesting option for holding your cash, even if it's just a small portion, 10% or 5% of your cash. Me personally, I'm loaning out USDC via crypto.com. I'm actually earning 12% annually on it currently. And of course, that rate is subject to change, but you have to keep in mind too that that 12% rate only comes with a 500 MCO stake, which as a side bonus gets you the second tier debit card, which gives you a 3% crypto back reward on all of your purchases, assuming that you can get the card in your jurisdiction. But even without the 500 MCO premium account, the rate is still 10% on stablecoins on a 3-month term. Now, you may think that lending your cash to provide liquidity in the crypto market is risky. And yes, it is indeed not without risk, thus the high rates of return. But compare a possible 12% to minus 0.75, and you will start to understand the allure for the savvy investor to move even some of their cash funds over into this market. And finally today, I want to discuss the incredibly difficult situations which we are seeing hit Lebanon and Chile this week. Anti-government protests are really sparking off all around the world. I mean, look, guys, decades of neoliberalism, it has failed. Neoliberalism is a failed model. We see massive growing wealth inequality, and that inequality is slowly breaking civil society. The system has been rigged for decades, and the rot is getting severe. And more people are waking up to this reality every single day. So over in Lebanon, Lebanon's banks have been closed for around a week. Just stop to imagine that. Just stop to imagine the hardship for people who are running out of cash, who could not put food on the table tonight because they had their money in a bank. You're supposed to be able to trust the banks, but we fundamentally know that we cannot trust the banks. And when the banks do reopen, there are a lot of people who are saying there's probably going to be a serious threat to the Lebanese financial system, as it is widely anticipated there is going to be a nationwide cash crisis and a massive run on the banks. And as we know, banks on average only have around 8 to 10% of your money, thanks to the scam, which is fractional reserve lending. The protests were triggered by a new tax reform plan put forward by the government that imposed taxes on a number of everyday services which people use, including WhatsApp. It's ridiculous. But this was really just the match on the powder keg for Lebanon. Unemployment currently sits around 40%, and Lebanon ranks 138 out of 175 countries in the Transparency International Global Corruption Perception Index. Decades of misgovernance, corruption, unemployment. People were at a breaking point already. Lebanese protesters say that their politicians have stolen what is likely to be hundreds of billions of dollars from them, and it's probably true because politicians, we know what politicians do. And in this pursuit of corruption, they have been aided by the country's banks and the unjust laws that allow bank secrecy for the elites. The restriction of access to banks, financial services, and money is such a stark reminder of why we need things like Bitcoin as a counter to the draconian power of governments, which lets politicians and banks rob you blind and basically without notice completely cut you off from the financial system. Which moves us on to Chile. So, the situation there has become pretty gosh darn heated in the last week, with protesters burning down metro stations and banks. The banks I get, metro stations not so much, but anyway, it's a side point. And people are being killed in the streets. It's damn serious what's going on. Now, it's hard to know exactly what is happening on the ground there, but there have been a lot of reports that ATMs are being locked and that people are unable to access their money. Keep seeing this repeat, don't we? Big protests cut people off from their money. Situation on the ground, of course, changing quickly, so it's hard to say how much this is happening, how many ATMs, how many banks are affected, how many users are affected. Going over and reading Spanish Twitter gives you some kind of an idea, but not the full picture by any means. But it is happening, which again just underlines the power that we have ceded to the banks over our lives. They decide when you get your money, where you get your money, and if you even get access to your money. Now look, I know it's just easy to go, Bitcoin, yeah, that's what we need here in response to these kind of situations, but what do countries undergoing extreme turmoil actually need from crypto? Probably the biggest, of course, is going to be access. Now, access is growing all the time. Obviously, it's super easy to go and download a wallet, start sending Bitcoin to people. But what if the government turns off the internet? In these kind of situations, that is certainly not an unreasonable thing to think might happen. Well, there are a few services that allow you to send crypto via text message, but of course you will still need a phone connection for that and to have downloaded the service before. But assuming you have that, the government, of course, can flip the switch off on the phone networks as well. Unlikely to happen, but possible. Okay, but what are the actual solutions here? Well, GoTenna is a radio relay network, and basically it does require having the devices, and you might potentially need to have devices linked every few kilometers to a bordering country where you can access the internet, but theoretically you can do radio relay Bitcoin transactions. Obviously, of course, you have paper wallets and things like the Open Dime device, which kind of functions as a cash version of Bitcoin, but there's no way to verify that the wallets contain Bitcoin without being able to verify in the blockchain and needing the internet for that. Not to mention, of course, that paper wallets could easily be counterfeited with really no way to verify the contents, again, without having internet access. Much more promising, though, are the Blockstream satellites, which are streaming Bitcoin 24/7 all over the world and which do not require internet access. It does, however, require a receiver and a small antenna. But if you have these simple tools, then you can access Bitcoin via the satellites. So yes, access to Bitcoin can be possible to almost anyone, anywhere, in any situation. And this is a massively underused, but actually really mission-critical piece of infrastructure for Bitcoin. But of course, all of that actually goes out the window if you are not prepared for it to happen in the first place, because of course you have to get out there and you have to download a Bitcoin wallet before the government cut the internet and have bought the relevant pieces of special equipment to be able to access that satellite network. But it exists. It's just education and getting it into more hands of more people. And on the other side of this is the massive issue of liquidity in these kind of situations. Because riddle me this, if all of your money is in the bank, and the banks are closed or they've been burnt down by protesters, and all the ATMs are locked and empty of money, then how do you propose to get the fiat needed to buy Bitcoin? Tough problem. And if you already have all of your money under your mattress, then you're probably not super worried about the cash crunch happening anyway. Obviously, you should have bought Bitcoin before your country falls into crisis. I don't know, I guess you could trade your car for Bitcoin or something like that, but of course then you need to find a buyer. Not as easy to get a good price for your car without being able to auction it off on the internet, and during times of extreme crisis, people are probably not in the car market. Anyway, things to keep in mind. Now this problem is further exacerbated by the fact that many countries around the world are massively underserved by crypto exchanges. And that, websites like Local Bitcoins, which we just talked about, oh, look at the volume here. It's still a super niche website. The reality is the majority of people in a lot of these places have no idea about Bitcoin. They have no idea how to get it, especially in a time of crisis, which is ironically when it would be most useful and people would have the highest need of it. But this is changing every single day. The banking shocks are opening the eyes of people the world over to how crazily corrupt and rotten and dysfunctional the banking system is. People are realizing that they are not in control of their money. The corrupt banks and their corrupt politician buddies, they are the ones in the driving seat and they cannot be trusted. And every day, more and more people learn about Bitcoin. What we need is more education around crypto. Blockchain centers, of course, help with this. Grassroots initiatives like La Bitcoineta, which is a van which goes from village to village in Argentina, educating people about Bitcoin. They're kind of, I don't know, the Johnny Appleseed of Bitcoin, if you will. But that's the kind of great stuff that we need. But you know what we need more than anything? We need you and we need me. It is so important that we as a community help spread the word about cryptocurrencies and what they can do. Help to educate our peers, help people set up wallets, help people get their first Bitcoin, or give somebody $5 a Bitcoin to get them started, to show them how easy it is. This is a very important part of the process and something that everyone can do. If you hear those conversations around the water cooler, we're like, man, it's a really tough situation over there in Lebanon right now. People can't access the money at banks. Like, yeah, imagine if you couldn't access your money when you go to the bank. You know what will always give you access to your money? Bitcoin. Have that conversation with people. Use these news events as kind of triggers to get people thinking about what if they went to the bank tomorrow and couldn't access their money. A lot of people, particularly in the Western countries, we live in a false sense of security. But to go back to that McKinsey report, half the world's banks are facing extinction because of systemic risks in the financial system. That's crazy. Anyway, thank you guys for listening to this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know any of your thoughts down below about what you think about the global banking system or any of these stories in particular. As always, you guys, seriously, I love you all. You totally freaking rock. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, thumbs up on that video. Make sure to subscribe to the channel down below. Long live the blockchain, and peace out till next time.